Ale is the founder of Unbound, the first Portuguese golden visa fund allowing investors to maintain exposure to Bitcoin with a 500K investment while gaining Portuguese and European citizenship. The fund launched 3 weeks ago and went viral, onboarding hundreds of requests within 48 hours. As an enthusiast of vertical network states, Ale is contributing to Draper Nation with Tim Draper. With an original background in law and an academic focus on public law, he has held various roles in institutions and governmental bodies in recent years. At Oxford University and Law Tech UK, he created a prototype for making civil justice more efficient for small disputes in the United Kingdom. As a scientific committee member of San Marino Innovation, he helped define blockchain legislation, among many other contributions. In September, Ali will launch a YouTube channel. And to stay in touch, you can subscribe to his newsletter, which we'll share in our chat. Thank you so much for being here, Ale. Please take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Veronica, and hi, everyone. I'm pretty sure in the room there is some friends of mine. I'm so sorry to not be there in person, but as I shared, and as you probably know, I had to be in China, so it will be for the next time. I would say let's keep this off. Let's get into it. I will try to stay within 40 minutes for this presentation, and I really appreciate this opportunity for having this chat, and I will do my best for sharing good maybe perspectives and my own personal point of view, and at the same time keeping it maybe a bit not so boring, although some of the topics I've been requested to discuss, inevitably they could be a bit a bit heavy, some serious stuff here. Okay, so how this presentation is going to look like? Very simply, I would like to start probably for most of you, bringing back to your memory what the basic concepts here, the 101, what is a state, what is a nation, and how the internet is impacting on these concepts. We will dive then into the 101 or very simple description of the network state as per Balaji definition. And after that, I will give you an example, a very basic one of how network state eventually one day could be sustainable, economically speaking. And most importantly, I will conclude with some personal notes of maybe my recent learnings with Unbound that hopefully will be good. I would like to share some from my own experiences, something I've learned and something that I'm still learning. And I hope this will contribute to maybe the next progress of everyone in the room with your own projects or in general initiatives. So let's start. I also have this kind of a bit strange position of talking apparently before Balaji and I will spend 30%, 40% of my presentation essentially explaining his model. I hope I will do a good job. And so I will try to be accurate enough. As I mentioned, let's start with the basics: states, nations, and the internet. So first of all, what's the difference between a nation and a state? So a nation typically is a term used for referring to a large body of people which shares the so-called commonalities, which means common descent, history, culture, or language. Usually they inhabit the same territory, but not necessarily. Now, what is a state, therefore? So the definition of state, at least in I would say globally in almost every legal doctrine, I would argue, is typically based on 4 key requirements. So a state, for simplicity, you can consider a state a form of human organization which is based on a territory, a population, a specific government, and the presence of the requirement of sovereignty, as we will examine in 1 minute. Let's keep it simple. So in order for a human organization to qualify properly as a state, at least in modern doctrine, the requirement is to have a specific territory, which is delimited, of course, by specific physical borders. There must be a population residing in that specific determined territory in a permanent way. It has to be a permanent establishment, okay? so the definition of a state, and the key four requirements are territory, population, government, and sovereignty. Just to make sure that everybody, I didn't got cut before. So it's quite interesting how in this definition, there must, according to the definition of a state, there must be a specific territory bound by physical borders, a population, which means a body of people, a group of people residing in that specific territory, and a government, which means an apparatus which possesses a specific kind of power of command over the people in a defined territory. Now, there is a fourth important requirement, is the so-called concept of sovereignty. And there has been actually dozens of books have been written about this concept, but to keep it very short, the concept of sovereignty means a specific form of authority that doesn't require the consent of any superior authority, which means, in other terms, that you can consider the term a specific state sovereign when that specific form of human organization represents and possesses the ultimate source of power. There is no one specific, essentially, form of authority superior to that one. So we have seen what is a nation, a body of people usually sharing some commonalities. A state, it's something different because it involves a government, a sovereign government over a population in a specific territory. And the thing I wanted to share with you, which is, I think also this point is pretty much, every time Balaji makes a speech, he emphasizes this point is we may tend to consider all these concepts of states and nations a bit, I would say, detached from the world of technological innovation. But if we look in depth, actually the very basis for the modern states, for what we currently consider states, is actually possesses its roots within a technological improvement, and specifically the creation of the printing press with Gutenberg in the 15th century. So to keep it very short, you can imagine that until that moment, until the printing press, the distribution of information was extremely costly. And after that, in the decades and then centuries afterward, the cost of sharing information dropped down dramatically. So in many actually say that this was the effective precondition for allowing the concept of modern state to arise. Why? Because before the printing press, the chance of distribution of newspapers, for example, was very limited. After that, the existence of affordable distribution of information allowed the creation of a collective experience, a collective sense of belonging among people, independently from the physical proximity. What does it mean? Before, I would say, let's say in the 15th century, you may have known everyone in the village or in the town you were living in. Maybe you could have somehow used printed books or information for, learning something in 10, 20 kilometers from where you are. With the printing press, the whole game changes. So this is quite relevant in my view, because it brings to, it's one of the two main topics I always, when I discuss these topics, I want to bring in. Why? Because the next one is, as we may know, nation states as we know them are a very recent concept. And this is, in my view, something important, because sometimes when we discuss these topics, we may be brought to think, oh, wow, countries have existed for, centuries, and they are something so old, and therefore it's so eradicated that innovation here is impossible. Well, this is not really true. And to keep it also a bit high level, let's focus for a moment on the United Nations. So the United Nations in the end, is a form of private, I would say, membership club of sovereign states. If you look at the chart on your right, you will see that starting from the 1945, the number of states admitted to the United Nations grew up consistently, and only in 2011, if I'm not wrong, thank you so much. Only in 2011, if I'm not wrong, South Sudan was admitted in the UN. So we are talking literally about 13 years ago. So the process of new states, the process of recognizing new states, in this case in the United Nations, is an ongoing activity. which is not something that has stopped, I don't know, 300 years ago. And if you look also for a moment at the very first, ideally, national state that existed in our, in our history, it's relatively, it's a relatively recent phenomenon. If you look at the data, eventually you will come to the conclusion that with the French Revolution in 1789, we have the first version of national state. 1789 is not, if you think for a moment, so far, right, as a phenomenon or something that should make us feeling, oh, wow, this is something that this whole phenomenon has been already established centuries ago and we can change it, or there is no chance of the evolution essentially has stopped. We can switch slide. So why I wanted to bring you in this high-level discussion, showing you in brief what is a nation, what is a state, how technology already predefined and determined the precondition for modern states to arise. And I also mentioned to you how the concept of modern state is not so old. Well, I wanted to clarify these points to you, because if you look upon this from this perspective, the current state of the art, it will be very easy for you to realize how the internet and Web3, specifically in the last 34 years, so starting from 1990, eventually have redefined the scene once more, as already happened for the concept of national states. How? Well, let's consider the power of online communities in the internet. Let's consider also the e-commerce, wave, of the early 2000 and 2010. The internet has created a precondition for an economy which is truly global. And in that regard, the existing of physical borders, as we progress, it became and eventually is becoming every day less and less relevant economically, but also culturally. Twitter, now X, ideally became the new public place hosting public discussions. Mastodon, Farcaster, and so far and so on. If we look at Web3 specifically, Web3 has the power of creating a truly stateless asset management layer for the internet itself. So what I am referring here possesses very important consequences. Next slide, please. So if we want to consider this brief history from this perspective, I think it's very easy to conclude how we are living nowadays in a specific moment, which is historically super relevant, where the digital world in general is becoming more important than the physical world. Why? Because the digital realm is where consciousness is formed, relationships often are built. I'm pretty sure that in the room, many of you have met each other first online before knowing eventually physically. It happened to me with so many friends. At the same time, a specific culture is made, culture on Reddit, subreddits, and so far and so on. And ultimately, with Web3, with blockchain, essentially scarce resources are managed more effectively. So this is a bit the current momentum or specific historical moment we are sharing right now. And this is, in my view, the right background for, that we want to consider for the a few other key points and analysis for this whole matter. Next slide. The next slide is quite just for telling thank you, because I understand that this is a kind of Mark Twain or Shakespeare moment. So thank you so much for this. I think after this is going to be more practical. So hold on. Last slide and next slide. So before we move into the next chapter, I wanted to bring to your attention this actually angle. This comes directly from Balaji. And I think this is quite on point. So I really like to every single time to repropose the same actually argument. New companies, new communities, new currencies, okay? So if you zoom out for a moment, in 1998, from the famous actually garage Google company was born from scratch. And from zero, it reached actually billions of users nowadays. It was 26 years ago. It was not 200 years ago, right? the Facebook 2004, new online communities. Bitcoin 2008, new currencies. So if new companies, new communities, and new currencies, okay, in the last 25-ish years have become and were able from zero to be distributed and radically changing and impacting the whole world, why should be so crazy to consider the hypothesis of creating new countries? This is the background. Let's now dive in the next section. And let's dive in specifically in the network state. We can actually switch 2 slides. The network state 101 is going to be the next one. And the next one as well is going to be my own angle and introduction to this topic. I will go a bit faster here because I would like to maybe spend a bit more time in the last chapter, touching a bit of practical essential learnings that I've been doing. And I believe this could be more interesting for you. But nonetheless, so let's start with the permission states. Next slide. The quick disclaimer is this angle and this specific kind of description is going to evolve, guys, okay? So I didn't have so much time the last few days, and I think I will have the opportunity to expand each one of these topics on YouTube or on my newsletter and in the next few weeks and months more abundantly. So please, the disclaimer is take these concepts as something that are currently under development. Next slide. Let's start with a definition that in my view is going to be quite useful and on point. But again, it's a starting point for the whole, probably, I don't know, vertical. I think we should introduce the concept of permissionless states. What are permissionless states? In my view, this definition can comprehend something, the evolution of national states. They should not be anything else than forms of human congregation that are operating on the base of an on-chain social contract, and they do not have territorial boundaries. From this perspective, network states or a network state is a form of a permissionless state. What is the key aspect of this hypothetical new category? The key aspect is that the relationship between government and citizens will be on-chain. And next slide, this means, well, this possesses a quite important meaning for every one of us, okay? Why? Because when we introduce a permissionless system governing the key aspects of a democracy, for example, this essentially creates a superior form of human rights and civil liberties for everyone, for every member or citizen of this new construct. As you can see from this slide, in the traditional concept of state, there is a particular emphasis on the requirement of the physical territory and the physical borders. In this definition, in the permissionless states and network states, in my view, the concept of physical borders should be considered almost not relevant. Why? Because an on-chain social contract can be the overarching actually principle and expression of the texture of the society, governing the society itself, and the population can be sharing a cohesive sense of identity independently from sharing a physical place, okay? And so far and so on. Next slide. Very briefly, and also to be a bit more pragmatic, okay? Why all this story really matters? Very simply, in 3 points, this direction of evolution, independently from which terminology we want to use, in my view, will bring in at least 3 key value propositions, which are, in my view, very important. First and foremost, so there will be a new and a sort of next generation of civil rights, which I would describe in these terms. There will be civil rights that you can exercise independently from being authorized to do so. So it will be a higher degree of liberty at any level in a state. Most importantly, you will be able to rely on truthful, not trustable states. They can't be evil by design. And lastly, you will be able to opt in and opt out from any one of these form of human organizations as you want. It will be considerably less complex, faster, and simple than the current moment. In the next slide, you will find actually a clip of a great movie, and I know I was talking with Veronica. We are going to share with you the link to this presentation. I think you will be able to watch this video maybe in a second moment. I don't want to make this presentation too long. So the movie is Equilibrium with Christian Bale. In my view, a great movie that somehow didn't. I don't know. It's not very frequently also on Twitter or in this page. I think debated, but I think this scene is super cool. So I invite you to give it a look when we share the link with you. Next slide. So to conclude this chapter, okay, in my view, to give you an introduction of network states, we started from the classical definition of state in relation to a specific nation, and we have seen how the element of territory is quite crucial. I'm introducing a concept of permissionless states, which could be a next generation or form of evolution of these concepts. And in my view, the network state, as described by Balaji, can be maybe probably the best or one of the best applications of this concept. And in my view, permissionless states will be a sort of concept similar to DAOs, which means it won't be necessarily a specific, well-identified concept, but rather a spectrum of different concepts. And this will include eventually network states, startup countries, or acceleration zones. Personally, I do believe that in next decade, at least the most effective product market fit form of this kind of construct will be in the direction of acceleration zones, quote unquote, and so far and so on. Now, this has to be an introduction on network state. So the next chapter, next slide, please, thank you so much, is going to be covering the concept of network state. So here I'm going to do my best to essentially share in some and make a very short, concise summary of Balaji's thought as expressed in his book. Next slide, please. And I don't know if most of you guys are familiar already with these concepts. I don't know how much you are, into them. So I will try to stay on a high level, but at the same time to share enough for everyone to have, I hope, a good understanding of this matter. First of all, how this whole thing started. So on July 4th, 2022, Balaji Srinivasan, who again will talk after me, published a super interesting book called The Network State. And of course, it's available on thenetworkstate.com for free. I invite everyone to give it a read. There are also two versions of, two summaries of the book, also in 1,000 words and whatever, in a few pages. So please dedicate at least 20 minutes, give it a read. I think it will be very interesting for everyone, independently from your own beliefs, independently from which degree you will essentially agree with what Balaji is proposing in the book. Now, what is a network state according to the definition that we can find in that book? A network state is a highly aligned online community which possesses a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. This is the short definition that we can find in Balaji's thought and book. Next slide, please. Let's zoom in and let's expand so that we have the chance and opportunity to grasp a bit more of what Balaji is really pointing to, okay, with this definition. So what is a network state? It's a social network with a moral innovation, a sense of national consciousness, and a recognized founder. This social network must possess capacity for collective action. And this capacity actually typically includes a couple of requirements or elements, such as an in-person level of civility, an integrated cryptocurrency, and a consensual form of government, which is limited by a social smart contract. This social network, which possesses this capacity of collective action, could, at a certain point, express himself or itself as an archipelago of crowdfunded physical territories, a specific virtual capital, and an on-chain an on-chain census that proves a large enough population, income, real estate footprint, which are necessary to obtain diplomatic recognition. Okay, it's a lot of stuff. I can see if somebody right now is a bit confused, so let me try to unpack it. The brilliant, in my view, approach of Balaji, which of course comes from tech. So in my view, he did a fantastic job in identifying a blueprint, which means a model that can be followed for creating eventual network state, is, in my view, has the specific value of keeping the things at the beginning very simple. It's a social network, but it's not like any other social network out there. Why? Because there must be a founder, first of all, which, okay, at this point, it's not a DAO. Why? Because there is a founder, so there is a first element of distinction. There should be a moral innovation or moral command, such as, for example, Brian Johnson at this point, don't die. Moral command, pre-identified founder. It has to be coordinated. So there must be a coordination element in whichever form it has to take. Eventually, there will be a series of physical areas in the world, which is eventually this archipelago of crowdfunding territories. And there must be some on-chain elements that can prove how effective, how radicated is this social network in terms of effectiveness of population. So quantity and quality eventually of members, how much money or income they possess. Maybe they collectively own a series of buildings or physical areas or lands. And all these elements might be useful one day for obtaining diplomatic recognition, which is, this would require a longer discussion, okay? But it's a very interesting topic we can expand if you want later. Next slide. To recap, what is the key? In very short terms, the Balaji model or Balaji's blueprint for creating the network state. First, you can create a so-called startup society, which is the social network with a specific moral point of view or command, and a specifically identified leader. You then organize it into a group capable of collective action, and you build trust offline. And for example, as the event you are having physically in Georgia, in this case, the step is identified by Balaji as network union. Eventually, this startup society and this network union can decide to create a network and create and fund, of course, a network of physical nodes defined as network archipelago. And lastly, eventually, there could be a phase which will end with the diplomatic recognition of this social network, this community, into an effective state. In this case, a network state, or a sovereign network state, to be more accurate. Next slide. How does this look like? These are very complex topics. They can be also misunderstood. There can be eventually some controversy behind them, right? So let's visualize something together. At least we make this complex topic a bit theoretical into a user interface that we may be able to see, who knows, next year, in 2 years, in 5 years from now. This is how this image is taken directly from the book, www.thenetworkstate.com. This could be how eventually a network state could look like. There is a population, an annual income. No, it's not an online game. It's not Risk. It's not SimCity 2.0 or whatever. No, this is how I think it could look at a certain point, a specific network state in a specific eventually stage. Next slide. Very shortly, this is something that in the past, I don't know, I've been asked a few times. So is a network state a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization? Question mark. Yes, no, maybe. In my view, the two concepts in theory are different for various reasons. And you will find afterward in this slide more content and more specifications. To be very practical, I personally don't think that it's very helpful at this stage to spend too much time in trying to, define upfront what is X, what is Y. I think we should all build and then put in action these concepts, and then we discuss them. But still, if you want to read at least my point of view at this point, this is what will make different a DAO from a network state. Most importantly, a DAO typically is token or asset based. Eventually, the governance is based on quantity or plutocracy, which means the amount of value expressed in native asset of a specific organization, in this case a DAO. The network state, in my view, eventually also at the startup society level, will be member-based. That said, let's go on the next slide, otherwise we go into a white rabbit hole, which will take us for 20 minutes. Okay, Ale, we have discussed nation states, nations, network states. Very interesting, but are we sure we are discussing something that doesn't go completely against the existing nation states? Are we sure that what we are discussing now doesn't go terribly in an opposite direction of what eventually Georgia, where you're physically, or Italy, where I'm originally from, have been building for the last few decades? Are we doing something good? Question mark. I think this is a legitimate question, right? So personally, I want to introduce my angle to this discussion, which is not Balaji's angle eventually, but my take is we should take in consideration what already happened in the traditional states with the special economic zones. So in the last decades, modern states have already decided, hey, it's time for us eventually to define that in a specific physical area of our territory, we allow a private entity to run the things there in a different way, eventually offering lower taxes or a simplified labor law. Historically, the concept of special economic zones was born in order to accelerate economic prosperity in underdeveloped geographical areas. For example, the Azores Islands in Portugal. So if an economy is really depressed, the state could decide, hey, in that specific area, I try to create a special set of incentives, both for individual residents, but also for corporates doing business there. Well, this experiment that started eventually in late 50s of the last century, as you can see on the right of the screen in this very small chart, has been proven to be highly successful. As an example, here in China, Shenzhen, which became a huge tech hub of China, was born as a special economic zone. This is a long topic, in my view, one of the most interesting, but for now, I just wanted to give you an heads up and bring this concept, in my view, as a valid analogy to the network states. Although they are different, although a special economic zone is technically under the authority and therefore is not a sovereign entity, in my view, it's the proof of how different areas, different forms of governance have been already accepted by states, and they produced immense results that can be quantified over the last 60 years plus. And the number of special economic zones grew up over the time. I would like to expand this topic, but I can't. So let's move on, and then if you want to again come back to it. I will aim to close in 8 minutes. So very briefly, next slide also, I will just give you in 60 seconds an idea. This idea is also for making this concept a bit more practical. Because, let's say that a network state or a startup society was a startup. The key question should be, okay, are we sure that whoever manages it will be able one day to find a viable business model, which means a viable form that makes economically sustainable this entity, question mark? The answer is, of course, we need to get there and do some work and then see how things go. But for now, I think it's quite interesting to just share with everyone there maybe an idea or two for understanding that in principle, what we're discussing is not crazy. What we're discussing is not something unfeasible. We don't know yet, eventually, which is the best economic model. Like for the internet, we don't know it yet, which is going to be the SaaS, software as a service model equivalent for this vertical or industry that eventually will be able to be replicated with success multiple times. But at this stage, it's important to, just for disambiguating this topic, in my view, to make an example. Let's say that somebody wants to create a non-ideological digital nomad republic. How many digital nomads are out there? At least 35 million. Let's say that the scope of this network state is providing better services for digital nomads around the world. In this case, I'm not even considering the specific format of the network state. There is no eventually a specific moral commandment. Maybe it's just a, who knows, a better value proposition in terms of quality of the services. We have 35 million people having $85,000 yearly salary on average. Next slide. We also can tell from which countries these hypothetical digital nomads are coming from. And we would discover, incredibly, in my view, that 49% of the digital nomads, according to the nomad list, thankfully, these are data provided by the nomad list of Peter Levels, great guy, and 49% of the people are coming from the States. Next slide. So let's say that for some reasons, this network state, this concept, this congregation of people, this initiative is successful. Let's say that there is a 15% of penetration rate of the target market over, who knows, 10 years. We would get hypothetically 5 million plus of population. Now, again, guys, this is not a business model. This is not a business plan. I'm just sharing some ideas for disambiguating a topic that otherwise, in my view, could be too controversial and maybe too theoretical, for showing you something incredible in my view. If this estimate one day will ever be true, we will be living in a world where a new digital nomad republic with 5 million plus citizens will be a bit smaller than Norway and a bit larger than Ireland. So this is something, in my view, super interesting. Why? Because when we discuss these topics on the books, in podcasts, we may end up thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be, I don't know, something we may exist in 100 years from now, and who knows, maybe, is this even going to be a country? It's too small. No. If you look at the real, you can go on Wikipedia right now, the average size of countries is small. And number-wise, if you get 15% of digital nomads out there, hypothetically, you have a country slightly smaller than Norway and bigger than Ireland. Last slide. Can these be profitable? I don't know. I can tell you that hypothetically, this could generate revenues for sure. I don't know if profitability can be reached, but just with a calculation on the back of the napkin, if every one of these hypothetical non-ideologic digital nomad republic was paying $250 per year, we would obtain 1.3 billion of annual revenue. What do we need to cover with this revenue in terms of services? I don't know it yet, but this is just an example to, probably sharing some food of thoughts for everyone. Now, last part, that is my view, the reason why I'm super excited to share a few very personal thoughts on this matter and to stimulate discussion. We can please move to the next slide. These are my more recent, actually, learnings and from building stuff in this vertical somehow. Next slide. In my view, to keep it very short, so if you want to build a SaaS or a DAO nowadays, and other examples, it depends also on your area of interest, but there are many areas of tech where the time needed for shipping an MVP and testing, validating the idea, the business model, and so far and so on, and product market fit is not terribly complex or slow. In this vertical, what I have seen many times is somehow it's difficult to ship efficiently and fast enough, products. So in my view, what I've been learning with Unbound, at least, the real challenge in this vertical is to strip from a product all the complexities and ship the only feature and the real only feature that is considered by a specific segment of potential customers a no-brainer. Why? Because it's true that we may attract in new startup societies the first 100, 1,000 people that are enthusiasts of the vision. And this is great. But we, in my view, need to then find a way to deliver a product that possesses a strong value proposition. And in my view, the risk of this vertical is to ship generic products that satisfy 10 different needs, but sometimes the challenge is to not satisfy a specific need strongly enough to eventually enable growth fast enough to, essentially generate escape velocity for a startup society or a startup or whatever you're considering. So in my view, again, this is how I express this concept sometimes. I think we should focus on shipping eventually some Nokia 3310. If there is anyone in the room in their 30s, I think they will be familiar with the phenomenal Nokia 3310, which was an indestructible phone. And of course, in my view, this paved the way for one day, after many years, for the iPhone. At this stage, I don't think we are yet ready for this vertical for the iPhone. I think we can, in the next 2 years, there will be the first 3310 out there, and it will be pretty cool. Next slide. What I've been doing and learning specifically comes from the recent experience of Unbound Fund. We launched, I think, 3 weeks ago at this point, and we went very viral. So we've got 800,000 views on Twitter, hundreds of direct messages, and more than 600 actually applications. So this means that technically we got on this fund with zero marketing expense over 250 million euro of applications. Of course, not all of them will convert, but this is, in my view, incredible. And would be another story, but in my case, I've been struggling for years in achieving product market fit, and I spent more than 10 years essentially in trying to find a true product market fit. And this was an incredible experience, and I will be sharing this experience much more in depth with data one day and with anything else. What I wanted to bring today for the purpose of this network state related meeting, I would say, is that, so as Veronica also said at the beginning, essentially we have created the first golden visa fund in the world that enables you to maintain exposure indirectly to Bitcoin. And in the meantime, you get a citizenship, in this case of Portugal, which means also a European citizenship. And this is very interesting for many reasons, okay? But I'm not here for discussing in depth Unbound. I wanted to bring you this experience because it's the one that made me understanding how in this vertical is very important, guys, to try at any cost to find the specific subset of feature, the specific feature that or component of your product or your startup society or your movement that is a true no-brainer. Then you expand with 3, 5, 6, 7 features. A good product in this field, in my view, there are too many risks that and frictions in order to make it successful. Next slide. The Repair Nation. Right now it's in beta. This project has about a dozen of physical facilities around the world, and in the last 2 weeks, it reached 100 plus ambassadors for in-person events. Across September and October, there will be so many physical events of a small scale. Okay, it will be something very familiar at so many cities. The key message is, if you like this vertical, subscribe, get into the newsletter, get the passport for now NFT. There will be something, in my view, super interesting coming up in Q4. And I can't spoil that much, so stay tuned for updates. It will be very unique, and it will leverage specifically the strengths behind this specific ecosystem, and in my view will be a boost for, in my view, the entire movement. Okay, so if you are interested, please consider to subscribe to the newsletter. To conclude very quickly, so next slide, sorry, please. So to keep it very short, we have shared so many concepts. Some of them are, maybe you agree with them, others would require more to be expanded. In my view, the real deal here, the real game, okay, the real valuable thing we are all doing together is not to build a specific network state or a specific model of permissionless state. In my view, there is only one thesis that makes, in my view, this movement a winning one, which is, if we look at the startup, at the internet, and then on the startup industry, the winning model has been the Silicon Valley model for startups as an ecosystem, which means in my view, the exciting opportunity and eventually reason why we should feel proud of what we do is that we are not here, or at this time not here telling you, hey guys, I think Uber versus Google specifically or Facebook is a great thing to do. No, my personal angle is betting and somehow considering great the Silicon Valley as a whole ecosystem. Why? Very simply. In the last 200 years, at least, there has not been innovation on a governance level in most of the physical places around the world. It's mathematical that if we enable, for once in specific areas, new experimentations, the ecosystem will create new models initially at a small scale, and these models could be embedded after proper validation by national states. So this is a win-win match if put in the right direction and in the right terms. Next slide. Last point, which is in my view crucial when we discuss these topics, and that's why I put it in this presentation, although it's a high-level presentation, is let's take Unbound as a reference. Oh yeah, Ale, but you have been doing a fund for people being able to invest €500,000. So this system may create an advantage only for the rich people. And Balaji is a successful entrepreneur, in very well connected, former Andres Horowitz. Are we sure we're building something for everyone that is socially creating value? And the answer is absolutely yes. And let me tell you why, although it's counterintuitive. Because if I enable with Unbound a person with capital, talent, and resources to move from whatever, Thailand or China, and acquire the European citizenship, we are introducing a social mobility. We are intensifying the capacity of people to choose with their feet where to be, which means governments that offer less freedom, less stability, will lose actually resources and so far and so on. This means that we are pushing for unhealthy competition that will force governments to step up the game for everyone. That's why, of course, improving the system for everyone in a specific place. So I could expand on these points, but with this, I think I'm concluding. The next slide is just for telling you, if you like these topics, my DMs are always open on Twitter at 0x_Ale, A-L-E. If you want to write, this is my email. I always, I'm very happy to connect at any time. And if you like this all stuff, somehow I will be, especially from September, to very active in interviewing cool people, sharing concepts, and trying to nurture the conversation about these topics. So if you want, please subscribe to my newsletter, which is alenewsletter.com. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the questions. Thank you.